It was the late 70s. Air New Zealand had pioneered this one-day round trip, a 12-hour flight to Antarctica. I mean, who doesn't want to visit Antarctica, right? I mean, it sounds like a beautiful place. And they pioneered this flight path to go and fly into this bay in Antarctica, take some pictures, and you turn around and fly right back. 12 hours on an airplane. Does that sound like fun to anybody? If you ever flown overseas, over the pond, so to speak, you know it's flying long term. I can't imagine what it was like in the 70s because I struggled even in the 2000s with access of movies and everything. That long flight, it can be difficult. But 1970s, Air New Zealand pioneered this day-long flight for people to be able to go and see this untouched land, so to speak. This large continent in the South Pole, if you will, and people were going one after another, lining up, buying tickets to take this 12-hour flight to see it. Well, on November 28th, 1979, I was -7 years old at the time. So I'm reading from a perspective of history here. 237 passengers and 20 crew members boarded a flight to go to Antarctica. Now, this wasn't the first flight. There were plenty of other flights. There was 12 other flights that had already taken this path and this course, and so they would fly around and take pictures and see everything. But this flight specifically, the pilots took a little bit of liberty. As they got closer to Antarctica in an effort to please the customers, they wanted them to have the best views and the best pictures and be able to take, I can't imagine what the sounds were those in 1970s, what the cameras must have looked like. Does anybody else's dad walk around with like a camcorder their entire childhood? And it was like this giant thing. Like it wasn't like a easy task. Now we just have our phones. And so I can't imagine what it was like taking videos and pictures of this untouched continent. Well, they decided to please the customers, and they flew lower than the recommended elevation so they could get really good views and pictures of the mountains. They flew in a figure eight as they flew into this bay surrounded by mountains. They flew in a figure eight so that they could get pictures in flying at this lower altitude. And when the pilots came out of the figure eight and they started making their way, what they didn't foresee is that there was going to be an optical illusion. I don't know if you've ever been skiing or in the mountains with a lot of snow, but everything looks the same, doesn't it? It's like if you're not paying attention, you can find yourself in trouble. And so as they're coming out of the figure eight, the snow-covered and ice-covered continent, they didn't realize they were about to fly right into Mount Erebus, one of the largest mountains on the continent. Because everything is white. They call it a sector whiteout. You can't tell what's the ground. You can't tell what's the sky. And after coming out of that pattern, the pilots realized too late that they were flying directly into the side of the mountain, tried their best to raise the plane, but the plane crashed right into the side of the mountain. I don't know if anybody remembers that in history. 237 passengers, 20 crew members died instantly on this plane. Wreckage was awful. It was one of the worst aviation wrecks and disasters to this day. All it took was a little deviation, a little change, a little freedom by the pilot, and one of the worst crashes took place in an instant. Now, safety with airplanes has come a long way since 1979. Statistically speaking, you are more safe on an airplane than you are driving your vehicle. Why is it that we don't feel as safe on an airplane? At least for me. Lindsay laughs at me every time we fly because I don't feel safe on an airplane. Why is it? Because I can't control it. Right? You feel like you have a better chance at living if you can control your destiny and your fate. Most of us aren't going to fly on a plane that's going to crash. Hopefully no one ever does. But for most of us, that's not going to happen. So what is the correlation here? I think the correlation is that planting a church in 2020 has felt a little bit more dangerous than even flying a plane unexperienced. There's been challenges, right? There's been difficulties all throughout this last year. And to be completely honest, that's what it's felt like to me as the pastor leading. Feels like we're flying this airplane and I don't know where all the controls are, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on and how are we supposed to do this and what buttons am I supposed to push, and it's kind of felt like that. And obviously this last year for all of us has been challenging. If you remember back to March of last year, Lindsay and I were at a church planting conference in March, early March. We flew back and it was within a couple of days they did the full shutdown. We were worshiping in this large auditorium with 5,000 other pastors singing out. There was no mention yet of social distancing or any of that kind of stuff. Masks were not a thing. And so you imagine like we're flying back a week before the shutdown, and all of a sudden the rodeo shuts down and sporting events and all the chaos happens, and everybody's freaking out and everybody's in their homes for 2 weeks and all the chaos that's going on with that. This last year, we've had COVID, we've had racial tension, we've had an election. Now we have the Capitol being stormed and everyone seemingly mad at each other. Does it feel like that to you, that everyone's mad and everyone wants to make their point, and I ignore my own advice many times and I post on Facebook anyways, right? You know, it's like, and then you end up like your whole night is spent like trying to have conversations online that you're not going to convince people. And so it's pointless, but I do it anyways because I can't help myself. All those crazy things and the challenges that we faced in the last year, it was crazy. Many of the plans that we had for the church got halted or changed. They had to. You started hearing all the buzzwords like we need to pivot. You remember that word when it first came out? It's time to pivot. You probably heard that in your workplace all the time. And you're like, if I hear that word one more time, I'm going to be in prison for killing somebody. Like it just pivot, change, the new normal. Remember all these words that were buzzing around last year? And you just kind of had this feeling of, I just want my life back. I just want normal back. I don't want a new normal. I want my normal. I want my life to be normal. And throughout this last year, church-wise, we've lived with a sense, and it's kind of felt like we've lived with a sense of just survive the season. Just ride out the chaos, being on this plane with turbulence. And I shared this story probably too many times, but when Lindsay and we went to New York a few years ago, and we were flying into LaGuardia, I think is the airport we flew into. And flying into New York, no one warned me that there were a lot of crosswinds in New York when you fly in. And so we're flying into this large city. I'm already tense because I've never been to this city before, and I'm like, I got to be the protector, right? I'm the husband, and I got to protect my wife. And so I'm thinking, like, what happens? You hear all these stories. I'm going to get mugged in New York, and I'm going to have to fight off a robber, and it's just going to be crazy. Like all these things going through your mind. Flying into New York, and it felt like to me that the plane turned literally sideways as we're going towards the runway, like started tilting like this. And I think I broke the handles, maybe just squeezing onto him, like, oh, stop it, and Lindsay is literally so gracious, so sweet of a person, laughing the entire time that it's going on. And I'm like, and we had a little thing happen, and so you know those things. The ones where you have to ask for forgiveness later. It has felt a little bit like that, like we don't have control of what's going on, and we're in this turbulent time, and it's kind of been like that for me. And so most of you in your own homes, you have felt this throughout the last year as well. You have felt a sense of survival, just survive. Whether it be job loss or job change, or maybe your office shut down and they're having you work from home, and the challenges of trying to work from home with your kids in the house and all the things that are going on. There's been challenges for all of us. It's not just the church. We understand that it's for many of us. But here's a few things that I've learned over this last year. Few things that we have learned and studies have shown of what the church looks like after COVID, post-COVID. And not to say that COVID is over. Obviously, we prayed for somebody this morning, a couple this morning. It's not over, but you get what I'm saying, the chaos of 2020. And I want to be careful how I present these things because I don't want to present them in a way of judgment or harshness. That's not my point. That would be unwise. It would be ungodly of me to do that. That's not my goal. But I want to present them as an opportunity for the church. That we have, as a church, we have an opportunity to do some incredible things in our community for gospel growth and gospel movement. I believe that the church, not collective, but the church as a whole, is primed for some of the greatest gospel movement that we've seen in America at least in the last decade. Because everything has been stripped away now, right? All the things that we love and the control and the beautiful lives that we've built, a lot of that got stripped away and pulled back. And so now people are questioning a lot more things, and we have opportunity to bring truth and love and grace to those questions. And so here's some of the opportunities that we have. I want you to listen to this. According to Barna Research, 1 out of every 3 practicing Christians never returned to church post-COVID shutdowns. 1 out of out of every three. Now, when they say practicing Christians, they say people that were regularly attending church at least 2 to 3 times a month. These aren't like, we call them like Christers that come on Christmas and Easter. It's not like people like that. It's like these people were there all the time, like 2 or 3 times a month. They were spending time in church. They're serving in church, and a third of the church gone, never returned post-COVID. After the shutdown, that COVID interrupted lives so much that church became less of a priority. And again, and I'm not saying that with an attitude of judgment. This is not coming from a place of bitterness. I'm trying to present this as an opportunity for us as a church to reach out and to love and to bring people into our community. Here's the other side of that. We also know that people were watching online, and we first did online, and I was preaching to the red dot for weeks and weeks and getting a little bit tired of being in a little room and preaching to a camera. There is still some beautiful things that happened. We saw, obviously, online engagement was high, and it was exciting. It's like, look how many people are watching. Well, look where they're watching from, and it's like all that. But what happened, the same with your kids' classes online, it's same with your meetings. It happened with our small groups. We called it Zoom fatigue. Remember, you get tired, like, I don't want to have one more online meeting ever again. Like, I'm done with online meetings. I'm past it, that Zoom fatigue. And so digital engagement is also down. So that same study says this: 50% of consistent churchgoers that have been staying home because of COVID haven't streamed their home church worship service in the last 4 weeks. So we have a third of the church never returned to in-person worship, but we also have people that were staying home for COVID, haven't been consistently being in tune and watching the stream, because I get it. It's hard, right? You remember when we were just streaming and trying to figure out, how am I supposed to watch and pay attention to the stream when my kids are literally burning down the house? If you have toddlers, you know what that's like. It's like, it is chaos. The kids are running around. One of the parents is getting onto the kids, and the other one's trying to watch, and they're like, I missed it. What did he say? I don't know. I can't rewind because it's live. And it's like all this stuff that's going on. It's challenging. I get it. I understand. But the point is this. Why do I bring that up? Is it 2 reasons? Because this is the reality that we are facing, not just at Collective, but the church as a whole. We are facing a great challenge, and I think a predicament in America specifically, that we have an opportunity, and there's challenges of getting people re-engaged, and then also getting people engaged to be on mission, to go out in our community, not just finding people that have stopped coming to church, but to, again, engage with our community. It looks a little bit different. Going door to door looks a little bit different than it did pre-COVID, right? If somebody shows up to your door without a mask on, delivery driver, God forbid, right? It's like everybody's got to have the mask on, everybody's got to be 6 feet apart, and all the things that we're trying to do, and I get it and I understand. But it looks different. So we want to see that this is the reality that the church, the capital C church, is facing. It's what 2020 brought us. But the second part is that we now have one of the greatest mission opportunities right here in our own community. And with that comes a need for us as a church to recalibrate, to kind of see where we are, where we're at, what we have been doing, and to recalibrate our mission. And so when we really, what it's felt like to me is that we call it in the leadership world, we call it mission drift. If you work in a workplace that talks often about mission and values, and it's reminded all the time, there's posters on the wall, and you're focused on those kinds of things. It has felt like for us that there's been a little bit of mission drift, that we are not doing exactly what God called us to do and what the mission and the values that God gave us when we planted Collective, because it has felt like we're just surviving. We just got to get through COVID, and we got to get through all the shutdowns, and we got to get through all the chaos. But here's what we want to do. We want to pause for the next 2 weeks. Obviously, I had other plans beginning of the year, but with Lindsay and I being exposed over New Year's, we changed our plans and what series we were going to do and that kind of thing. So we're going to pause for the next 2 weeks, and we're going to look at what God has uniquely called Collective to do in the kingdom. We spend the next 2 weeks going through our core values. Some of you have heard these before. Some of you have these even memorized, which is great. But I know there's a lot of us that don't remember or haven't been refreshed on it. And so, because I can almost guarantee you, I can maybe call on a few people and say, what's core value number 3? And it's like, And so it's good to be reminded. It's good, not that, like, we're not trying to indoctrinate you to where it's like we all sound the same. We go into the community and like, oh, great, you go to a cult. That's awesome. That's not what we want. But we do want to look towards where are we going as a church? What are we doing? What has God called us to do? So we want to be reminded. Here's the main idea. Calibrating to our values will provoke our hearts to the mission God has given us. Calibrating to our values, correcting to our values will provoke our hearts to the mission that God has given us. Now, I want you to hear me on this, that when you talk about mission and you talk about values, without a doubt, there will be people that will say, well, you are taking away or adding to the message of the gospel. And I want to reassure you and lovingly push back on this. We are not adding to or taking away from the gospel. The gospel will always be in front and center of what we are doing, what we are talking about it. You're going to hear us talk about it. You're going to hear us encourage you and challenge you to share the gospel, to lift Jesus up and to put him as the forefront of everything that we are doing. But we are going to talk about our mission and values because it is going to guide and direct us as a church, to give us vision and direction in what we're doing. What makes churches different than all the other ones? Why not have one great big church where we can all like have a different service time at Lakewood and Houston and everybody show up at one time and different times and we could just make it work? Why do we have different churches? Because God has uniquely called all of us in different churches to do different things and to reach people maybe in different ways and different methods, but the message always stays the same. So that's what we want to talk about these next 2 weeks. Core value number 1, if you're looking to get it tattooed, this is a great one, contagious grace. Don't do that, please. And basically, from what Brian said, don't get one on your ribs, evidently. That hurts, the way he said last week. Contagious grace. Now, we obviously, when we planted Collective, we had no clue there was going to be a pandemic in the next year. And so when we think of that word contagious, some of us have a little bit of PTSD from that, like over the last year, right? That was not in our plans to think about those things. And so we spent the last year in what feels like a movie. And here, I have the microphone so I can do this. I have a minor complaint with my life right now, okay? I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but TV shows, like when I watch TV, like everybody's wearing masks and they're talking about the pandemic and I'm like, I don't want to see it. Right? I want this escape from everything that I've lived over the last year. I want to see something normal. And I find myself like tuning out. I'm like, I don't want to watch it. I don't want to see masks. I don't want to see and being moody about it. I want real life. I want this escape to get out of what we've been seeing. First world problems, isn't it? But we chose this word contagious because that's how we see grace moving. We see grace moving at a contagious pace. When we look at the early church and how the early church was growing, we look at the day of Pentecost when Peter gets up and preaches and thousands are saved and come to know Christ. When we see the early church multiplying house churches and what we would consider our small groups, when we see those things happen, we see and we can read and we study with revivals past that it happens when grace is contagious. When you see radical people getting radically changed and radically saved by the message of Jesus, we see this movement towards that. And so that's why we chose this word contagious. And if there was ever a time that we needed to show our world grace, it's now. I don't know if y'all can sense this, and maybe it's just, I know that we all live in our own bubbles with social media. But it seems like there's a lot of tension between the world and the church right now. Here's part of the problem. In an effort to pursue holiness, which is good, which is right, which we should do. In an effort to do this, we have made the world our enemy instead of making it our mission. I want to say that again. We have made the world our enemy instead of making it our mission. Instead of saying, this is opportunity, what do? We get, instead of being heartbroken by the things we see, we get mad. Instead of praying for the lost, we rant about them or we try to legislate them into morality. And we have built generations of people that are going into our world, young people that are going into our world, that are seeing this disconnect between how the scriptures say that Jesus and his followers are and how we are actually living. We've made the world our enemy instead of making it our mission. I want you to hear me on this. This does not mean that I like or have to agree with everything that I see going on in our world. I want you to be really clear on that, okay? I'm not saying that our country doesn't matter. I'm not saying that America doesn't matter. I'm not saying that legislation doesn't matter. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that when we go into our world, it means that we should be showing the grace that is so undeserved that we receive, we should be showing that same grace to our world in a contagious way. But we can't do that if we see the world as our enemy. If we're always yelling and mad at the world, that's just not how it's going to work. It doesn't say that we are led to repentance by our judgment, right? We weren't led to a relationship with Jesus by his judgment. We were led to repentance by what? Kindness. It's his kindness that leads us to repentance. I'm not saying that we have to just, give up on everything and whatever happens. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is for us to pay attention and to take this message of grace and love and mercy and take it to our world that desperately needs it. We have to be willing to do that. I don't want you to just take my word for it. Let's look at Luke chapter 19 this morning. Very popular Bible story, even has a best hit song written after him. If you grew up in church, that's a church joke. Zacchaeus. Anybody know the song? You want to sing it? No, don't, please. Verse 1, and he entered Jericho and was passing through, and behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. And he was seeking to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not, because he was small in stature. I feel like some empathy with him. Like I feel like I'm in the same place as Zacchaeus. So he ran on ahead and climbed into a sycamore tree to see him. For he was about to pass that way, and when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. And so he hurried and came down and received him joyfully. And when they saw it, they all grumbled. He's gone to the house to be a guest of a man who was a sinner. And Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. And Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, since he also is a son of Abraham, for the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. Now, tax collectors were not considered to be the most loving and likable people in this time. They would often self-impose an extra tax on top of what was already owed, creating a wealth for themselves. You imagine that most of us in the room would probably say, we don't want more taxes. I don't want to give anybody else anything else. I feel like I pay my fair share. These tax collectors would tax on top of what was already to be given, creating this wealth on the backs of the hardworking people. And as Zacchaeus wasn't just a tax collector, he was the chief tax collector, which you could almost say he was the chief sinner. Wasn't very liked in the community, probably facing a lot of hatred and bitterness towards him because of what was going on. And he sees this guy named Jesus who, we have to keep in mind that we are reading the Bible as a scriptural or as a historical event. Zacchaeus wasn't reading about Jesus. He knew about the Messiah more than likely. He understood a lot of those things, but it's happening real time for him. And so he hears this thing about Jesus and jumps up into the tree and climbs so he could just get a glimpse of him. Now, why did he want to see who Jesus was? I'm going to infer a little bit. The scriptures don't say this, I'm taking a little bit of liberty, but why don't the scriptures say anything about why he heard? I don't know, but why he wanted to see him. But I can infer this is that I believe that Zacchaeus had been hearing about this man named Jesus. He'd been hearing about the miracles that were taking place. He'd been hearing about that people were walking by just touching his hem and they were going to be healed. And he's talking about this new kingdom. And how could you talk about a new kingdom when we're in control of the Romans and all these things that had to have been spreading around the community and these little cities and towns that they're in. And in Jericho, Zacchaeus must have heard, climbed up in a tree, I have to see who this guy Jesus is. Jesus notices this guy named Zacchaeus, and he does the unthinkable. He asks to dine and to stay with the sinner. The audacity, right? How could a person of God be around a sinner? Does that kind of sound familiar? That's kind of how I grew up. And I was in youth ministry for quite a while, and I wish I could go back. And I understand, you are who you surround yourself with, all those things. I understand you put yourself around bad people, it's more than likely you're going to find yourself doing bad things. But if I could go back, I would challenge people and say to not make them their enemy. That you have to reach out to sinners, right? And to sometimes look in the mirror and say, I myself am a sinner as well. which is difficult to do. This person of God, Jesus, hanging around a sinner, we've been conditioned to see the world as our enemy, but Jesus sees the world as an opportunity. Verse 9, let's look at that again. Jesus says from today, salvation has come to this house. Salvation has come to this house since he also is a son of Abraham, for the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. We can't seek and save the lost if we aren't willing to see the world as our mission. We talk about this often, getting outside of the walls of the church and being in the community and not just reaching out to church people, but if you are living on mission and paying attention to the world around you, we'll get to some of that later on next week in our series, you're going to see people that are in desperate need of a Savior. People that you're working with. Not everybody at your workplace is more than likely not a Christ follower. I would imagine not. Or at least they're not acting like it. They need a little bit of refining from the Holy Spirit, so you can be praying for them too. People of God taking the grace of God to a world that desperately needs it. Number one, we have to be spreading contagious grace. Are you doing that? Let's recalibrate to that. Number two, core value number two is captivating hospitality. Now, we forget, I believe, how important hospitality is until we have an experience where we are not well taken care of. If you don't believe me, go to a restaurant and let me know which one you're going to. I'll call the manager and I'll just say, could you give them the worst experience they've ever had in a restaurant before? And see how Christian we act, right? It's like we forget how important it is when people are taking care of you well, and you go to a restaurant and it's like, this person's in the wrong business. Like, they're in the hospitality business. They haven't smiled one time. They're like, you ask for a straw and it's like, sure. You're like, hospitality restaurant. That you forget how important it is. You go on vacation and the beds aren't right, or there's the rooms aren't clean in the hotel or the Airbnb or whatever it is, and you realize, like, if you go to somebody and you say, hey, this isn't right, and if they just don't care, what does it make you feel like? Like you're offended, right? Some of y'all act like y'all act like y'all don't do this when you go on vacation or you go somewhere. You're like, no, I just keep my mouth quiet and just lay in the dirty bed. No, you don't. You feel awful, right? You're like, I need somebody to fix this. I want somebody to fix it. Because it's hospitality. So you're paying for something, you're going somewhere, you want people to take care of you and love you well. And it's kind of like you going home to you want that feeling of going home to your mom's house, your dad's house. It's like, they're just going to take care of you. Like when my parents come in town, like I asked my mom, like, could you please make this one meal that we ate all the time? Could you just make it? And like I say, like, I feel like just loved and cared. Not that Lindsay does all this. She cares for me. Like, y'all are thinking like, gosh, Lindsay's struggling. But there's something different when your mom does it, right? It's like you go home and your mom's cooking for you. You're like, oh, she's making you plates, and like when you were growing up, it was like, make your own plate, And now she's like serving you, and you're like, wow, this is so good. Hospitality is important. Y'all think my mom and my wife are horrible now. Hospitality is a spiritual gift, and not everyone has the gift of hospitality, but I want you to hear me clearly on this. You may not have the gift of hospitality, but everyone can be hospitable. Not having the gift of hospitality is not an opportunity or a way to let you off the hook to be rude or unengaged or any of that. Like, I'm not letting anybody off the hook this series, right? Everybody's going to get something. Everybody's getting resaved in this series. Just because you don't have that gift, and you know those people that have that gift, they love having people in their home. Like, they always have, like, they could just like whip up a charcuterie tray and like out of nothing, and you're like, that. Who has all that stuff in their fridge? They have a gift of hospitality, don't they? It's like they just want people. They're waiting on somebody to knock on their door like, hey, can I? Yes, I've been waiting on you all day. Like, they come in, they're serving, they're taking care of you, they're loving on you well, they're making sure that all your needs are met. Now, that's not me, right? Like, I prefer, like, I want the text before, hey, I'm in the neighborhood. Nope, you're not. Go to the next neighborhood. That's not my gift, but I can't let myself off the hook. Hospitality is important. Let's look at Hebrews chapter 13. I haven't preached in like 4 weeks, so I'm going to go for a couple hours, all right? Verse 1, let brotherly love continue. Let brotherly love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unaware. Now, this happened to Moses in the Old Testament. Most likely, I don't think that many of us are going to be entertaining angels. I hope that'd be pretty awesome. What if God did that for us? Like, you get to heaven, he's like, hey, you remember that person so-and-so? Yep, it was an angel. That'd be pretty cool. But I wanted to point out that one part because you're going to look at that and it's like, what in the world? Like, are we entertaining angels like all the time? What does this mean? Let brotherly love continue. This is biblical community, that we love one another, we serve one another, we care for our own. And I feel like, honestly, I feel like we're doing okay at that, right? Where if you're in small groups and you're on the group messaging app that we have for our small groups and people are sharing prayer requests and they're checking in like, hey, how's that going? Are you doing all right? Everything fine? People were checking on us as we were quarantined and, like just making sure like you're still alive, like we still have a pastor, like everything all right? We're doing that. But the writer of Hebrews says, encouraging it, do it, keep doing it. Keep loving on one another. Keep shepherding each other. Keep leaning into community. He says, don't neglect to show hospitality to strangers. Now, this was huge in their time. They didn't have all the luxuries that we have now, and they couldn't pull up an app and have a car pull up in front of them, their Uber, and have them drive around a town and drop them off at their Airbnb and have food delivered to their room. All the luxuries that are really neat for us to have these days if you're stuck at home. Like, at least for me, like we have found the online grocery thing is like not a good idea for us. Because it's like you can get everything, right? It's like everything's at your disposal. You can pull up, they put it in your car for you. You don't even have to say hi if you don't want to. It's like boom, 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 see you later. It's awesome. But they didn't have all this. Travel was difficult. They had long traveling days. It was dirty, it was hot, it was dangerous even traveling to certain parts of the country and the region. And God says, I want you to show hospitality to these strangers. Many times they would welcome strangers into their homes, love on them, serve them, show them hospitality, and send them on their way. And not just send them on their way, they'd cook for them. They'd give them extra bread, extra water, extra wine. They would send them on their way to keep going. It was this over-the-top sense of hospitality that every person that you are serving, you serve them as if you were serving God. Now, I'm just as guilty as anyone else. But in the high-tech world that we live in, someone comes to our door, what do? We pull out our phone, we're looking at our Ring app, like who is interrupting my day to be at my doorbell and it show up on my phone in the middle of a meeting? The Ring app or whatever variation of that you might have at your house. Anyone coming to our door is an inconvenience these days. And the writer says, show the stranger hospitality. Now, I'm not saying like put yourself in danger all the time, but I am saying we've probably lost a little bit of sense of this. In the world, and especially in the suburbs where everybody works away, you come back, you pull in the garage, you shut your garage door, and we don't talk to our neighbors as much as we used to, as it was when I was growing up, and everybody's kind of playing in the yard and playing in the streets. Everybody's talking. We don't see that as much anymore. He's saying show hospitality. Now, obviously, we don't travel like they did in Bible times and biblical times, and I understand there's a big difference, but when the correlation for me is this. Though the travel was hard for them, we have no clue the difficulties and the challenges that people are walking into our doors with each and every Sunday, or when they walk through the doors of one of our homes for small groups. We don't understand the burden that has been placed on them for that. We don't understand the challenges and the difficulties, and they're walking through our doors. And one of my worst nightmares as a pastor is a person searching for truth, searching for hope, searching for love and acceptance, walks through the doors of a church, and not one of the Christians say a thing to them or welcome them. It's like this nightmare scenario for me. We want to be a church that goes out of our way to show hospitality to our church community, and more importantly, to the community outside of our walls. So I challenge you. I encourage you. When you see people new at church, Go out of your way. At least make this statement to yourself. If they only leave knowing my name and my family, then they've at least met somebody. And when they come back, then we can at least they can at least know that they're gonna count on me being there. Are we willing to break outside of our comfort zone? For some of you, you hear that and you're like, I am terrified to do that. I don't want to go to a stranger and introduce myself. That is like the worst possible scenario. And I get the side of introverts and I understand that. But I challenge you and I encourage you, push past that. Make it your mission because it makes a huge difference. It's not the norm. And if anybody else has had an experience where you go to a church and it feels like no one says anything to you, you ever had that before? It's not the best feeling, is it? You go in, there's a crowd of people, but you feel so alone. It's like, wow, I don't know anybody. It's weird. Nobody has even said anything unless the pastor said to, like the greeting time that we used to do pre-COVID, right? But no one's going out of their way to get to know, hey, you have a great family. What's your kids' names? What's your name? Can I share contact with you? What are you doing next week? Are you coming back? Like, if you go to a service and you don't have that, you notice it. You might not notice it when it's there, but you will definitely notice it when it's missing. So today I'm commissioning you. I'm challenging you. Let's practice captivating hospitality. We want to be people that spread contagious grace, and we want to be people that are showing captivating hospitality. Calibrating to our values will provoke our hearts to the mission that God has given us. Worship team, you can come.